The galaxy remembered the silence long before it remembered the screams. Historians would spend centuries trying to pinpoint the exact second everything changed, but no archive, no quantum recorder, and no surviving witness could agree. Some claimed it began when Earth's final diplomatic beacon went dark. Others insisted it was the moment the last human ambassador quietly walked out of the Galactic Assembly without a single word. Whatever the truth, every civilization remembered the feeling. It was the unsettling realization that something familiar had vanished. For the first time in over 300 years, humanity stopped answering. Distress calls echoed unanswered through the void. Trade convoys reached abandoned rendezvous points where only drifting navigation buoys remained, blinking lonely signals into endless darkness. Embassies that had once welcomed every species stood empty, their lights still glowing as if their occupants had simply stepped outside and never returned. Across thousands of star systems, confusion slowly transformed into unease. Then unease became fear. Because silence, in a galaxy addicted to constant communication, was never natural. At first, the great powers celebrated. News networks declared that humanity had finally broken beneath centuries of pressure. Politicians mocked the species that had spent generations preaching cooperation while enduring betrayal after betrayal. Military analysts confidently predicted the collapse of the human confederation within months. Corporate empires divided future human territory on holographic maps before a single battle had even begun. They remembered the trade disputes. They remembered the sanctions. They remembered the border raids, the pirate attacks ignored by the Galactic Council, and the colonies sacrificed for political convenience. They remembered how humans always rebuilt instead of retaliating. Always negotiated instead of invading. Always buried their dead, and extended another hand in peace. To everyone else, it looked like weakness dressed in idealism. But there were older minds in the galaxy, ancient admirals, forgotten scholars, and weathered explorers who had watched humanity longer than anyone cared to admit. They did not celebrate. They watched the growing silence with expressions that betrayed something dangerously close to dread. They remembered another pattern hidden beneath centuries of diplomacy. Humans had never threatened revenge. Never promised annihilation. Never glorified conquest. Instead, they had repeated the same quiet warning through every treaty, every negotiation, every ceasefire. Patience is not endless. Most dismissed those words as philosophy. The elders understood them as a promise. Civilizations capable of extraordinary restraint were often capable of extraordinary fury. The question had never been whether humanity possessed overwhelming strength. The question was whether anyone would ever force them to use it. Across the spiral arms of the Milky Way, observatories began noticing impossible anomalies. Entire defense fleets disappeared from long-range sensors without firing their engines. Deep space listening stations detected encrypted transmissions lasting less than a billionth of a second before vanishing into static. Shipyards orbiting forgotten human colonies suddenly powered down, leaving only darkness where once there had been rivers of industrial light. It was as though an invisible hand was gathering every scattered fragment of humanity into a place no one else could see. No declarations of war followed. No broadcasts. No demands. Only an expanding silence so complete that even experienced starship captains admitted they had never feared empty space until that moment. Then, without warning, every major government in known space received the same transmission. No signature identified its origin. No encryption could be traced. No artificial intelligence could determine how it had bypassed the most secure communication networks ever built. The message contained only 6 words. Humanity has exhausted its patience. Prepare. Nothing more. No countdown. No explanation. Only silence once again. And somewhere beyond the reach of every telescope, hidden behind the cold darkness between the stars, humanity finally stopped waiting. Commander Elias Ward stood motionless inside the primary observation deck of the battleship Resolute, his reflection faintly visible against the enormous crystal viewport that stretched from floor to ceiling. Beyond the glass, the Orion frontier drifted in solemn silence, a graveyard of civilization scattered across the stars. Broken orbital stations spun endlessly through the darkness, their once brilliant habitat rings shattered into jagged halos of metal. Cargo freighters, abandoned decades earlier, floated lifelessly between asteroid fields, their distress beacons long since drained of power. Every fragment of wreckage told the same story. Every scar in the void carried the memory of another colony that had believed peace would be enough. The light of distant suns shimmered across the debris like candles burning over forgotten graves, casting the battlefield in an eerie golden glow that somehow made the silence even heavier. Elias had seen these ruins before. Hundreds of them. Yet each visit felt like reopening an old wound that had never truly healed. His hand rested against the cold railing overlooking the bridge as the ship's engines emitted a deep, rhythmic vibration beneath his boots, a constant reminder that even in stillness, humanity was moving towards something inevitable. Around him, officers worked with disciplined precision. No one raised their voice. No one wasted emotion. Holographic star maps floated above command consoles, displaying thousands of blinking systems connected by luminous trade routes that had slowly disappeared over generations. Entire sectors were now marked only by faint gray symbols, the universal designation for worlds lost beyond recovery. To outsiders, they were statistics. To Elias, every faded icon represented families, dreams, and names that history would never fully remember. The Resolute itself was unlike any warship the galaxy had ever imagined. Its immense armored hull concealed far more than weapons. Vast ecological chambers stretched through its interior, containing forests where birds still sang beneath artificial skies. Rivers flowed through carefully engineered valleys, supplying fresh water to entire districts. Children of military families attended schools protected deep inside the vessel, while hospitals, research laboratories, and botanical sanctuaries occupied decks larger than many planetary cities. Humanity had learned a painful lesson over centuries of conflict: survival required more than firepower. A civilization could only endure if it carried its culture, its hope, and its future wherever it traveled. Every human flagship was not merely a battleship, it was a living world. Hidden beneath those peaceful landscapes, however, rested technologies few living beings had ever witnessed. Kilometer-long quantum rail cannons slept inside reinforced launch corridors. Autonomous drone swarms remained locked within magnetic vaults, awaiting commands they prayed would never come. Shield generators pulsed with enough energy to wrap entire moons in protective barriers, while experimental engines quietly folded microscopic pockets of space around the vessel itself. None of these systems were displayed with pride. There were no grand ceremonies celebrating military strength. Humanity had spent generations treating these machines as insurance policies rather than symbols of dominance. Weapons existed because history demanded preparedness, not because humanity desired conquest. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Every officer on the bridge instinctively turned toward the central command dais as a secure transmission emerged from Earth's unified council. No ceremony accompanied it. No inspiring speech. Just a single encrypted authorization bearing the highest classification ever issued in human history. Elias watched the confirmation code illuminate across his console, and for the first time in decades, he felt the weight of something larger than duty settling onto his shoulders. The order contained only one sentence. Operation Final Horizon is hereby authorized. He closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. For centuries, humanity had endured. For centuries, it had rebuilt. For centuries, it had chosen patience over vengeance. Now, standing aboard the Resolute as countless stars burned silently beyond the glass, Commander Elias Ward understood what generations before him had sacrificed to prevent. The age of enduring had come to its end, the Dominion Alliance attacked with the confidence of an empire that had never truly been challenged. Their invasion fleets emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, thousands of warships stretching across the darkness like an ocean of polished steel. Crimson engine trails burned through the void while command carriers projected victory broadcasts before the first shot had even been fired. Across military bridges, admirals smiled as tactical displays confirmed exactly what they had expected. Human border stations were silent. Defense platforms remained inactive. Patrol fleets were nowhere to be found. To the Dominion High Command, the conclusion seemed obvious. Humanity had finally broken beneath centuries of pressure. The species that had spent generations rebuilding shattered colonies, honoring impossible treaties, and forgiving unforgivable betrayals had at last surrendered to exhaustion. Their patience, the Dominion believed, had become their undoing. The first worlds fell without resistance, but something about the victories felt deeply wrong. Colonies that intelligence reports had described as thriving population centers were completely empty. Streets remained spotless beneath artificial skies. Lights glowed inside apartments where untouched meals still rested on dining tables. Parks echoed with the sound of automated maintenance drones trimming grass no one would ever walk across again. Hospitals stood ready with operating rooms illuminated, medical systems functioning perfectly despite the complete absence of doctors or patients. There were no bodies. No signs of panic. No hurried evacuations. It was as though millions of people had simply vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Dominion soldiers searched every district, every underground shelter, every orbital habitat. They found only silence. Then the broadcasts began. Every communication screen, regardless of encryption or security clearance, flickered simultaneously. Navigation systems froze. Fleet-wide command networks stalled for exactly 3 seconds before a simple black screen appeared. White letters slowly materialized in every known language, their meaning impossible to mistake. You were warned. Nothing else. No signature. No threat. Only those 3 words. An uneasy quiet spread through the Dominion Armada. Veteran officers exchanged nervous glances but quickly dismissed the message as psychological warfare. Younger commanders laughed, insisting frightened humans were attempting one final act of defiance before inevitable defeat. Orders were given to continue advancing deeper into Confederation territory. Hundreds of fleets accelerated forward, unaware that every movement had already been anticipated years before the first invasion ship crossed the border. Then reality itself seemed to hesitate. Sensors throughout the Armada began reporting impossible readings. Gravity fluctuated without explanation. Entire regions of empty space shimmered like reflections on disturbed water. Long-range scanners detected enormous masses where moments earlier nothing had existed. Artificial intelligences attempted to compensate, only to return the same impossible conclusion over and over. No known physical explanation. Panic spread quietly at first. Captains reported losing visual contact with neighboring formations despite remaining only kilometers apart. Fighter squadrons disappeared while flying through apparently empty sectors of space. Communications echoed strangely, voices arriving seconds before they had actually been spoken. Even time seemed uncertain. Experienced navigators felt instinctive dread creeping beneath years of disciplined training. Something hidden was moving around them, not through normal space, but beneath it. Far away, aboard the Resolute, Commander Elias Ward stood silently before a holographic battlefield spanning the entire bridge. Blue markers representing humanity remained invisible to every known sensor, yet they glowed brightly on his tactical display. Millions of autonomous vessels rested inside folded dimensions, waiting with absolute precision. Entire fleets occupied spaces the Dominion believed to be empty, concealed by technologies developed during centuries of preparation and perfected in complete secrecy. Every possible enemy maneuver had been simulated. Every invasion route predicted. Humanity had never intended to fight this war quickly. It had spent generations ensuring it would never have to fight it twice. Elias looked across the bridge, where no officer celebrated what was about to happen. There were no cheers. No triumphant speeches. Only solemn faces carrying the weight of history. They all understood the terrible truth. Humanity had not disappeared. Humanity had simply stepped out of sight. And as the first hidden fleets began emerging from folded space around the unsuspecting Dominion Armada, the invaders finally realized the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy was never the one that shouted the loudest. It was the one that waited the longest. The revelation did not arrive through rumor, intercepted intelligence, or a captured prisoner. It came directly from humanity itself. As hidden fleets sealed every escape route and the Dominion Alliance struggled to comprehend the impossible battlefield unfolding around them, every military command center, government palace, research institute, and civilian broadcast network across known space activated simultaneously. Screens flickered without warning. Quantum communication arrays accepted a signal that no encryption could block, no firewall could reject, and no artificial intelligence could trace. The image that appeared was deceptively simple. Commander Elias Ward stood alone inside a vast chamber carved from polished black stone, illuminated only by the pale blue glow of stars drifting beyond an enormous circular window. Behind him rested no banners of conquest, no symbols of empire, and no trophies of victory. Instead, there was only silence, and an ancient emblem worn smooth by the passage of countless centuries. When Elias finally spoke, his voice carried neither hatred nor triumph. It carried the unbearable weight of memory. For thousands of years, he began, you believed humanity was the newest civilization among the stars. That belief was not your mistake. It was our choice. The chamber dissolved into living history. Holographic records unfolded across every screen in the galaxy, revealing scenes no species had ever imagined. Long before the Dominion Alliance existed, before the Galactic Council, before the oldest recorded civilizations had discovered fire or language, humanity had ruled an age history had forgotten. Star systems bloomed beneath elegant megastructures stretching around entire suns. Gateways bent space across millions of light-years. Vast fleets crossed the cosmos without engines, carried on principles modern science considered impossible. Oceans glittered beneath artificial constellations crafted by human hands, while worlds once thought naturally habitable were shown being carefully shaped by ancient engineers. Humanity had not merely explored the galaxy, they had helped build the civilization upon which every younger species unknowingly stood. Then the images changed. The magnificent empire became a nightmare. Entire planets burned beneath weapons powerful enough to fracture continents. Artificial intelligences turned against their creators after centuries of manipulation. Rival human factions unleashed technologies capable of tearing holes through the fabric of reality itself. Whole constellations disappeared into expanding gravitational scars that remained visible even now as dark regions between galaxies. Billions died. Then trillions. Victory became meaningless because nothing worthy remained to inherit it. Humanity had stood at the peak of existence, and nearly erased life from the universe through its own arrogance. Elias allowed the silence to linger before continuing. So we ended it ourselves. The next sequence stunned even the oldest scholars watching across the galaxy. Ancient human leaders voluntarily dismantled the greatest civilization ever created. Planet-sized shipyards were buried beneath oceans. Reality-altering weapons were locked inside forgotten moons. Entire archives were erased. Colonies were abandoned. Survivors scattered among primitive worlds, choosing to begin again with nothing but memory and one solemn vow: never again would humanity rule through fear. They would become explorers instead of conquerors. Builders instead of emperors. They would allow younger civilizations the opportunity to forge a future free from humanity's shadow, even if history forgot who had protected that possibility. For 10,000 years, Elias said quietly, we kept that promise. His expression hardened, not with anger, but with profound sorrow. You mistook our restraint for weakness. You mistook our mercy for helplessness. You mistook our patience for surrender. The camera shifted behind him. Massive vault doors, each the size of a mountain range, slowly began opening somewhere deep beneath Earth's oceans. On forgotten moons, colossal hangars illuminated for the first time since prehistoric ages. Hidden inside gas giants, dormant factories awakened with thunderous waves of energy that rippled through surrounding space. Ancient fleets emerged from darkness like celestial continents, their luminous hulls dwarfing every modern warship ever constructed. Reality itself bent gently around their passage as technologies beyond contemporary understanding stirred back to life. The legendary arsenal of Sol, the greatest military force ever created, had never been destroyed. It had only been sleeping. And now, after 10,000 years of silence, humanity had finally decided the galaxy had given them no other choice but to remember who they once were. The awakening of the arsenal of Sol did not begin with thunder, explosions, or triumphant fanfare. It began with light. Across the darkness of interstellar space, ancient beacons that had remained dormant for 10,000 years ignited one after another, forming brilliant chains that stretched across forgotten sectors of the galaxy. Hidden gateways unfolded like blooming stars, releasing waves of pale white energy that bent space itself into shimmering corridors. Then they came. Vast human dreadnoughts emerged from the folded dimensions in absolute silence, each one so immense that entire Dominion battle groups disappeared beneath their shadows. Their gleaming hulls bore no symbols of conquest, only the weathered emblem of Earth, polished by centuries rather than decorated by victories. Around them drifted countless escort vessels, autonomous guardians, medical carriers, rescue cruisers, and engineering ships moving together with flawless precision. They did not resemble an invading armada. They resembled an entire civilization arriving as one. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Elias Ward stood before the tactical display while thousands of blue markers spread across the holographic battlefield. Every enemy formation had already been mapped. Every civilian transport identified. Every possible casualty calculated. The room remained almost unnaturally quiet. Officers exchanged concise reports with calm professionalism, their voices carrying neither excitement nor hatred. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, not to destroy without restraint, but to ensure that when humanity finally fought back, it would never become the monster history had once forced it to defeat within itself. Elias studied the battlefield for a long moment before issuing the only command that mattered. Protect life first. End the war second. The order echoed through millions of ships simultaneously. Then the impossible began. Instead of unleashing indiscriminate devastation, human fleets moved with breathtaking precision. Quantum rail cannons fired beams of compressed gravitational energy that sliced directly through enemy weapon arrays while leaving command bridges intact. Swarms of intelligent drones flooded across hostile battleships, disabling engines, hacking targeting systems, and sealing reactor cores before catastrophic explosions could occur. Planet-killing missiles vanished into shimmering singularity fields that folded them safely out of existence. Entire Dominion fleets found their weapons powerless, their shields collapsing under technologies designed not merely to overpower an enemy, but to remove their ability to continue fighting altogether. It was warfare transformed into surgery, swift, controlled, and devastatingly efficient. Meanwhile, another battle unfolded where few expected it. Human rescue vessels crossed active combat zones to evacuate civilians trapped aboard collapsing stations regardless of species or allegiance. Combat medics treated wounded Dominion soldiers beside injured human marines without hesitation. Autonomous construction drones stabilized orbital habitats damaged by crossfire before returning to the battlefield. Even as ancient weapons reshaped the balance of power, humanity refused to abandon the principles that had defined them through centuries of suffering. Mercy had survived the fire. On the bridge of the Dominion flagship, Supreme Marshal Kaler watched the impossible unfold with trembling hands. Every military doctrine he had ever trusted was collapsing before his eyes. Humanity possessed overwhelming superiority. They could have erased every fleet in moments. Instead, they dismantled the Dominion's war machine piece by piece while sparing every life they reasonably could. For the first time since the invasion began, Kalar understood the terrible difference between a civilization that fought because it desired conquest, and one that fought because every other option had been exhausted. Commander Elias Ward stared silently through the observation window as enemy weapons fell dark across the stars. He remembered the ruined colonies. The children buried beneath shattered cities. The diplomats who had begged for peace until their final breath. Rage still lived within him. It always would. But rage would not command humanity today. With one final authorization, he ordered the Dominion Central Military Network permanently disabled. Their fleets drifted powerless but intact. Their government survived. Their people lived. The battle was over. Humanity had achieved absolute victory, not because it proved it could destroy the galaxy, but because, after finally earning the power to destroy everything, it chose not to. And in that single act of impossible restraint, every civilization understood why humanity had always been the most dangerous species among the stars. Not because of the weapons it carried, but because of the mercy it refused to surrender. Centuries passed, but the echoes of that day never faded. Empires rose, governments dissolved, and new civilizations reached for the stars, yet every generation inherited the same story, not as propaganda, not as myth, but as a warning carved into the foundation of galactic history. The battlefields where fleets had once collided in silence became sacred memorials suspended among the stars. Twisted wreckage was left untouched, preserved inside immense spheres of shimmering energy so future travelers could witness the terrible cost of pride. Children from worlds that had once been bitter enemies walked those silent corridors together, guided by historians instead of soldiers. They stood beneath fractured hulls large enough to eclipse cities, reading the names of millions who never returned home. The silence there felt different now. It no longer carried fear. It carried remembrance. The Galactic Assembly was rebuilt upon neutral ground, not as a monument to victory, but as a monument to restraint. Its soaring halls were fashioned from recovered metal donated by every surviving civilization, each alloy retaining the scars of the war that had nearly consumed them all. Human engineers worked beside former Dominion architects. Alien artists painted murals celebrating rescue missions rather than battles. The Grand Central Chamber featured no statues of conquerors and no banners proclaiming triumph. Instead, sunlight from a nearby binary star filtered through an enormous crystalline dome, scattering thousands of shifting beams across the floor to symbolize countless worlds bound together by a fragile peace. Every delegate who entered the chamber first passed beneath a single inscription etched into polished stone, not a threat, but a promise that history demanded no one forget. Commander Elias Ward never sought the fame history offered him. When the war ended, he quietly declined every title, every political office, and every proposal to become the permanent protector of the galaxy. He returned to Earth, where oceans once again reflected peaceful skies instead of orbital defenses. There, far from government chambers and military parades, he spent the remainder of his life teaching young cadets that courage was measured not by how fiercely one could fight, but by how long one was willing to preserve peace before drawing a weapon. The nightmares never fully left him. Some evenings he stood alone along quiet coastlines, watching waves roll toward the shore as if searching for voices that had long since vanished. He remembered every order he had given. Every life he could not save. Every moment humanity had stood on the edge of becoming the empire it had once destroyed. And each morning, he was grateful they had stepped back. Long after Elias was gone, his final address to the restored assembly became required study throughout known space. Its recording contained no dramatic music, no grand declarations of superiority, and no celebration of humanity's unmatched power. He simply looked into the camera with the calm expression of someone who understood both the beauty and the burden of survival. Peace is never protected by hope alone, he said. Hope inspires us to seek understanding, but peace endures only when good people possess both the strength to defend it and the wisdom to know when to stop. Never mistake compassion for surrender. Never mistake restraint for weakness. And never force those who cherish peace to prove how capable they are of war. His words echoed through classrooms, starships, research stations, and colonies for generations. In time, the phrase, human patience, entered every known language as more than an expression. It became a universal measure of restraint, the invisible line no civilization dared cross. Whenever political tensions rose or old rivalries threatened to ignite another conflict, leaders needed only to glance toward the preserved battlefields drifting silently among the stars. They remembered what had happened when humanity had finally exhausted every peaceful path. Because no species ever forgot the day humanity's patience finally ended. Not because humanity conquered the galaxy. But because, when it finally held the power to rule everything, it chose instead to protect a future where no one ever had to fear that power again. And beneath an endless sky filled with quiet stars, that choice became humanity's greatest victory, and its most enduring legacy.